Hello world, hello X, hello Tucker Carlson. This is my second video regards your so-called interview with Vladimir Putin. In my first video I mentioned that you did a horrible job, and I want to highlight that again. The more I listen to your interview, the more I listen to other people criticizing your interview, I can definitely say, yes, you wasted our time, absolutely. But it's not without any positive information came out of it. Like, something is relatively okay, but this is only accessible to people who actually well educated, have a really good knowledge of history, kind of understand what the situation is. So most likely, again, it's really hard to assess. Most likely people who watched your interview are divided into two major categories. One, which probably be around 20% of people who watched it, came to the conclusion that Putin is insane and he is not a person that we can make a peace with, a person who we can negotiate or take seriously at all. Like, this is a horrible person, and we should stay away from him, his politics, absolutely everything that is associated with him. And that will be a very relatively small group from the people who listened to him, who watched your interview. And the majority probably will come to the similar understanding but a different conclusion, which will say, well, he is so insane, we have to make peace, we have to make appeasement, because he will be flying nukes all over the world. And this is probably the most negative impact that you could have done to the whole world, considering how many people watched your interview. Now, the good thing is, if we start analyzing and we start dissecting the interview line by line, we will come to the conclusion and that Putin is insane, like literally insane. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's living in a fairy tale that he told himself. And this fairy tale is actually very, the story is very sad, because for almost 100 years, from the Tsar's Russia to the Soviet Russia to current Russia, what the major part of Soviet politics and Russian politics was towards the West is to portray it as bad as possible. So lots of money, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars over the years, were flown overseas to pretty much all the countries to spread how bad America is, how bad the Jews are, and how bad the capitalism is, and much, much more. And as they did that, most of them, Russians, and especially those in Kremlin, they believe themselves, they believe their own lies, and they build their own politics around it. So this interview only proves it, because Putin speaks phrases and references events of their own disinformation machine, but he takes it to the extreme. One of these extremes is he is trying to rehabilitate Hitler. He says that Hitler was forced to invade Poland, which is bullshit. We know that this is bullshit. There was a Nuremberg trial. We know from that his intention to invade Poland was way before he actually did it. So there was no negotiation, and then as a result of failed negotiation, he attacked. The negotiation was a pretext to the existing plans to attack, and he knew that the negotiation will fail. Is a part of the hybrid wars. Like, hey, look, we're so innocent. We didn't do. We tried to be as peaceful as possible. Is the other side, which is bad. And this is exactly what Russia did. They did it with Poland as well. They did it with Baltic countries. They did it with Finland, with absolutely everybody. Throughout the last 300 years, there is not a single major agreement that Russia signed, doesn't matter which Russia it was, and actually kept it. They broke absolutely every agreement that they ever made. That's their nature. They're just dishonest. They're just garbage. And I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the politics. I'm talking about people sitting in power. They will seize the moment when their enemy, because they don't have friends, they have partners, temporary partners, and everybody else's enemy. It's just a matter of time. Right now, because you didn't do your homework, and you absolutely, this is absolutely horrible interview, because you didn't do your basic homework. You would watch a little bit of their propaganda, and in the course of one single week, they will decide on the biggest platforms, TV platforms, which are watched by the majority of the population. They will proclaim their enemies to be states, France, Germany, England, Australia for whatever reason, Canada. Like, they will just literally, like, they will find some bad news at any of these countries. It's like, we have to invade them, we have to destroy them, they have to understand that they cannot play with us. Baltic countries, and then if for whatever reason, right, I don't know, like, there is nothing bad to report, there is no major news outside of Russia, like outside of on the west side, like nothing is happening, everybody is focused on the Super Bowl or something like that, they will start blaming their own closest allies and friends and neighbors, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan. These are their strategic partners. These are biggest, even though they don't want to be their biggest allies, they're forced to, because historical and economical ties, which are so engraved in the region, right? That it just happened to be that they were forced to be friends or partners because of the brutal, bloody ruling of Soviet. So you didn't do your homework. But the worst thing that you didn't do, and the hardest questions that you could potentially ask, you didn't ask them, right? Well, you tried to, like, why did you invade Ukraine? Which is an obvious question. And for that question, he was lecturing you on the history from the times of dinosaurs. Nobody, absolutely nobody does that. So like it was like he was feeding you BS for 30 minutes, so you will forget, literally forget what the question was to begin with, right? Again, and you didn't push it. You didn't finish the question. You didn't get proper or clear answer whatsoever. But you didn't ask a decent question. Why do you have, like, you pretend to be a democracy, you pretend to be decent to your people, progressive, and everything, but at the same time you have political prisoners. And so happened to be, and by now everybody knows, that the biggest political opposition leader was murdered, assassinated in jail, in Russian jail over this week. Now, the excuses that Russian high-end politicians give it, and you have, like, again, you didn't do your homework, you didn't see how things unfold. So the very first excuse that Navalny was killed is because Putin had a very successful interview with you, Tucker. This is their excuse. So he was killed by the West, by Americans, because to cast the shadow on Kremlin because the interview was so good. This is what they're pushing. This is the propaganda, Russian propaganda. Because any other reason is completely well, I cannot find words. Like, any other reason is impossible because Navalny has no value in terms of Russian opposition, and nobody cares about him at all. Like, they trying to dismiss his existence, period, even though Putin afraid to mention his name, because that will be such a big publicity stunt if suddenly his listeners, his followers, or lovers, whatever you call them, fanatics, will hear his name. So for the last almost 14 years, he never mentioned his name. It's like a Harry Potter story, the one that should be not named. This is how ridiculous Putin is. And so Americans are being blamed for killing Navalny because your interview was successful, and then 3 days after the murder, the generals or the commanders or responsible for managing the prisoners, they get ranks lifted up and being praised for amazing work. This is how ridiculous and contradicting they are. Like, Americans went who knows where, like he was sent to furthest away jail possible from anywhere. So Americans went all the way after the interview, planned an operation, and successfully assassinated the only opposition against tyrannical regime, and the guy who oversees the jail and handling of the prisoners gets a medal for that and gets additional rank. He's a general now or some sort. This is how bad, how stupid the Russian propaganda is. Right now, Navalny's wife, she says that she's going to continue his work. So absolutely everybody, again, in Russian propaganda, is blasting her, not for her intentions, not for her. It's just, they're blasting her that she's not crying enough, she's not grieving enough because of her husband. It looks like her eyes are not red enough, so she is actually using makeup, and they cannot find proper words. They cannot talk about the opposition fact. They're dismissing her humanity. They're dismissing her strength. She's been living in hell for last, I don't know, 10 years. Her husband was nearly assassinated, who knows how many times. The number of insults, and you name it. I'm a very, very tiny vlogger, like absolutely small. My view counts are miserable. But when sometimes I say something and it reaches that search engine algorithm, and suddenly I have thousands of views, suddenly, and I get such trash. I get so many insults. I get death threats to me, to my parents, to my kids, to everybody within minutes. It's incredible. And I'm nobody, and I live far, and I have a very little relationship with Russia. So yeah, I really don't care. I'm personally thrive on that because these people are wasting their resources trying to insult me. The more they insult me, the better I feel next day. But she's been living in hell for the last, at least from 2011. Because when Navalny came to power and he was able to gather masses to stand for their own rights, for their own future, he was target of constant persecution, constant insults, attacks, physicals, emotionals, whatever it is. So the wife is clearly knows what it is, and I have no idea how many times she already thought and felt and understood that the husband never comes back. It's obvious. Yeah. Done deal. So you never asked about dozens and dozens of political arrests and political deaths, journalists, historians, generals, businessmen, very high-profile businessmen in Putin's inner circle forget how to drive, how to take a bath, how to smoke on the balcony. Suddenly they fall, slip, forget to hit brakes, all that stuff. Hundreds, just not few. Clintons compared to that are like playing in a sandbox, and you didn't do any of that. Unfortunately, as much as I tried and I dug through the entire history of Russia, trying to find something good, aside from Tetris, nothing decent came out of that country. Absolutely nothing. And when it comes to world politics, when it comes to economy, building relationships, everything is done through force, through blood, through corruption. Putin comes to power, and suddenly Russia is flooded with drugs, flooded enormously. Why? Well, everything leads to his business. On his inauguration, right, he becomes a new Tsar of Russia. In the Kremlin, in the biggest hall, you have official criminals, those who are running enterprises, known, violent, aggressive. These are people who are stealing by billions, and they are among people invited to see who sits in the throne, who takes over the power. You never ask that. This is a very, 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 well, you didn't do any homework. Absolutely no homework whatsoever. If Putin was going through the history, you shouldn't prepare and ask questions. How come in Soviet and Russian history, through last 100 years, Russia was not participating in the war for only 3 years? Only 3 years out of 100, Russia was not part of the war. And not just like because there's lots of wars, but most of them were initiated by the Russia itself, or with major support. It's unbelievable how, like, if you want to dive into the history, if you want to spend time, if you want to deliver a journalistic material, take your interview and Google and compare absolutely every sentence that Putin said. Every sentence. And you will find out that it's a lie. It's a lie. It's such twisted lie. And then, after that, you can make a decent conclusion. Then you can have like material. Hey, I gave a lunatic a microphone. You saw that. Now let's see how insane he is. You didn't ask him if he's the actual original Putin. That would be a nice question. Because again, whatever this current Putin says 100% contradicts what original Putin said a couple of years ago. Completely contradicts. You cannot make that mistake. It's not that he's saying used to say 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then suddenly he mentioned something like 2 plus 2 equals 5. Right now he says it's square root of minus 77. This is uncomparable to what nonsense he delivers now compared to what he was saying 5, 10, 20 years. People don't change unless they suffer a major stroke multiple times. Like, yeah, just insane. So if you want to fix your reputation, you need to dissect your entire interview and actually compare it to the facts. Again, you can dive to Wikipedia, which is heavily edited to position Russia as positive as possible, even in the worst cases, because the amount of money being dropped into bots, into fake accounts, into misinformation, like, it's a military operation there with tens of thousands of users constantly bombarding the internet and every information resource with misleading data constantly. I see it in my feed all the time. Following your interview, you had small bits and pieces again talking about how cheap the life is, how great the subway station in Moscow is. Well, yes, maybe subway station. They invested money. Now, again, if you are to spend a minute and get outside of the major cities, the level of poverty outside of 10, maybe 15 biggest cities in Russia is absolutely devastating. It's mind-boggling. Like, you cannot imagine to yourself under which conditions people are living. Where some people live in the houses where, again, I can, like, if I'll be cutting you images from style of living of some people, they will lift floors because the floor is not nailed properly to the base, to the foundation, and there will be 2, 3, 4 foot of raw sewage swimming under their floor. Stinks like hell. Like, you see dozens and dozens of mosquitoes and other flies coming out of it. Dozens, hundreds. And this is livable conditions for millions, not hundreds, millions of people. Throughout the Putin's regime, over 30,000, close to 30,000 schools were closed. Close to 20,000 hospitals were closed. Who knows how many villages and small settlements died. People moved out. So Russia essentially dying. Well, I don't know how, again, the comparison of the subway station, there's road circles around Moscow. Like, they build a huge circle. One of these circles, the cost, an average cost of the sign, right, a regular sign, was estimated to be $60,000. And when they compared the cost of 1 kilometer of the road, it was more expensive than 1 kilometer of Hadron Collider, which is built 17 kilometers underground or whatever it is. Like, the Hadron Collider, the most sophisticated construction in the world, most sophisticated thing, and it costs less per kilometer than to build a regular asphalt road in Russia, in Moscow. They steal money everywhere. You haven't asked him about his castle, which cost billions of dollars, which has its own anti-aircraft missiles. Why? Where's the money from? You, Tucker, just so you understand, by the time you drink your morning coffee on Monday, you earned more money than average citizen in Russia will earn in 2-3 months. Just into perspective of the poverty. It's not Detroit of the worst times after riots and after people left and factories were closed. No. Certain cities are so polluted, people are dying, nobody cares. Literally nobody cares. There's still people with radioactive poisoning. They're not being treated from the Chernobyl or other major incidents. Nobody knows about it. There's closed military cities with no access, and when something bad happens, nobody is aware of it. They will just die out. Who cares? So when you see a small bits and pieces of something good in Moscow or in Russia, and it exists, absolutely. They managed to build certain structures, they have some history, they stole so many artifacts, you name it. Yeah, being tourists in Russia is interesting. But to compare the style of life, to the fact that people freeze to death in their own apartments because the water pipes bursted and there is no heating for weeks, and when people start turning electrical heaters, the grid goes down, and nobody, absolutely nobody, comes to check on them. There's war veterans which live in absolute poverty, and when they're celebrating victory of the World War II, which they don't actually call it World War II because they are too ashamed to admit that the World War II started because of Russia. They come to these veterans and they bring 2 loaves of bread and like, hey, you almost gave your life for us. Here, 2 loaves of bread. That's all you deserve. And a thank you letter card. Thank you. People live in absolute poverty. The military parade that they celebrate the end of war has more and more veterans each and every year sitting next to Putin, even though every year they will die out more and more. Some of them which were proven that they're fake, and every year the same fake which were proven over and over again that they're fake, they somehow manage to get more medals. Somehow. Who knows? You haven't done your homework. Your interview is absolute garbage. And if you want to somewhat redeem yourself, go ahead, do your research, debate every phrase in that interview, and then post a real thing. And then we can say, hey, you did a good job. You did a job, not a good, you did a job. At this point in time, you wasted everybody's time, and you gave Russians, for the sake of their own, you gave Kremlin inside their house more power. You benefited him. Yep, that's it. Really, really disappointing. That's it for now. Take care.